July 7, 2014. We're going to start off with the mayor's statement. Notice of this meeting has been provided in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act by posting a copy of the agenda on the bulletin board at the municipal complex, filing a copy of the agenda in the office of the township clerk at the municipal complex, forwarding a copy of the agenda to the Broward County Times and Carrier Post, forwarding written notice to each person who has requested copies of the regular meeting schedule. All of the above posting, filings, mailings have taken place on the 3rd day of July 2014. I ask everyone to stand for a moment of silence, followed by flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody, and welcome. Hope you're enjoying, or at least beating the heat. We're going to start off tonight's meeting with a discussion regarding scheduling matters. Do we have any scheduling matters you want to bring up? Okay. Seeing none, we will move to reports from members of council, and we'll start with Deputy Mayor Jordan. Victoria.
First of all, I want to thank Scott and Patty and Karen Daly for getting us our packets by Thursday this week. Really appreciate that following our conversation at the last meeting. So the other thing I have to add is this weekend, the Sound of Music from War Arts is going to be opening at the Morristown High School. In particular, I want to point out that on Saturday, the 19th, there will be a matinee at 2 p.m. that's specifically geared towards a special needs audience. They'll have American Sign Language interpreters, warnings for the loud noises, a quiet room for anyone who needs to remove himself from the room. That's a great opportunity if you have anyone who needs those kinds of accommodations so they can get out and see a great musical. And that's it.
Great. Thank you, Victoria. Phil.
I really have nothing to report.
Greg.
Good evening, everyone. Nancy and I just went to Phil Atluch's viewing. Phil Atluch was a great Morristonian, was an environmentalist, and it's a great loss for the town. I also was able to attend and actually MC the opening concert of the Morristown Summer Concert Series, which was featuring War Arts. Which had many folks there doing different numbers. It was a great time. At some point, I'd like to address the fact that I'm still having trouble with my email. If we could address that at some point in the meeting. I'm sure it's probably just minimal and getting used to things in the building, which has happened, but we need to address it. I've had a lot of problems with my email.
Thank you, Greg.
Chris, you want me to just answer that now?
Sure.
It's also, it also, good follow-up to Victoria mentioning getting the packets out. Because obviously getting the packets out electronically is the most efficient way to do it. So I did talk to John about the emails today. I think as most of you know, or some of you know, he was working over the holiday weekend, coming in, and he's transferring the email over to the Outlook server. The voicemail over to the Outlook server. Whether or not that impacted the emails negatively, I don't know. But John's been spending a ton of time, and the three gentlemen at the table here can attest to this, in helping get the library PCO, which I was going to announce a little bit later on, but I'll say it now. The library PCO was received today. The library's doors will be open at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Please come on down to the library. But John's still, like he did with Town Hall, getting all the workstations up and everything else. There's a lot more workstations at the library. He's getting all that stuff up and running. He certainly understands, though, that communication to council is a huge priority. He is working on it, so I will keep council abreast. In the meantime, I think we have everybody's personal emails, and Karen will be and I will be communicating through that until we get the township email straightened out.
As long as we're discussing that subject, I wonder if it would be of value for us to all have since you can make a Gmail without any big deal, have a council Gmail that will be a backup. It's just a thought, I just throw it out there. But you can easily make the council Gmail that's just your council Gmail, just a thought.
Okay. Thank you, Greg, and thanks, Scott, for the update. I was away on vacation and I have nothing to report since I'm guessing you don't want to hear about my vacation. Let's move to scheduling items. If anybody has a matter they'd like scheduled, you can bring it up now or at any point in the meeting. We'll move to upcoming meetings. The next meeting will be July 21st, 2014 at 7:30 p.m. here in the municipal building, followed by a meeting on August 4th, which I can't believe we're looking at August dates already. August 4th, 2014, 7:30 p.m. Does anybody have any agenda updates? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adopt a resolution approving the consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Abstention or nays? None. Okay, moving to item 5, our informal discussion, also known as the workshop. Scott, why don't you take it away for the workshop?
Sure. And just to reiterate, so the library TCO was received today, and I want to thank the 3 gentlemen sitting to our left for all their work to get that done. I also want to thank again Joe Galbraith and the library staff for working tremendously hard over the last month in getting the library ready. It's like Town Hall. I'm sure there's going to be some bumps and bruises the first days, weeks, maybe a month, but it really is something special, and I'm really looking forward to the residents beginning to come in and enjoy the new library starting tomorrow. At some point, and probably the next meeting, maybe the first meeting in August, we should nail down a date for the opening ceremony. We are considering the Town Hall and Library opening soft openings, get through all of the, iron out all the small little issues that we've had, and also, as we discussed at the prior meeting, wait till residents are back from their summer-long vacation. So the next meeting and the meeting after that, we can nail down a date for the grand opening. One more quick note before we move on to workshop items. Council, I believe, has a copy of the audit report in front of them tonight, and I'm very happy to say that the audit report does not have a single recommendation, Tom. It's essentially a flawless report, and Tom and his staff, especially Mary Ann and our human resources, have helped tremendously with that. So for a municipality of our size, not to have a single comment
That's great.
on the audit is
Great work, Tom.
Very good, Tom.
You should go to New York more often.
Moving on to our workshop items, council members had asked me to put on there, the first thing we have on the list is agenda format. There was interest expressed in terms of perhaps modifying the agenda format, and thought it was best to have that discussion with council as a whole at a meeting.
Just to keep the flow of the meeting. Sometimes when we come in, we have a lot of business we want to get to. So I would like to see the presentations, the residents requesting presentations, just move to the end where we can get in, we get all the resolutions and the ordinance is done, and then move more effectively on to the open discussion items. It just seems it's been bogged down, and a couple meetings back we had the same, the instance where we're just sitting here for a little while, discussing things, which is great. I mean, we're all here to discuss it, but we had some individuals who are waiting an hour or so just to talk things through. So I would just like to see that just move to the end. We'll come in, we'll get down to the meat of the matter, and then move on to discussion items.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not offended at the idea of moving it, since people will still have the opportunity to speak several times On ordinances, they can speak. Certainly throughout the meeting, there are certain other opportunities for public comment. Consent agenda was another thing. And as long as it's moved to the back and not eliminated, I think it's a good idea.
I don't think it's a good idea, and actually, if you remember in March of when we started as a council, I had brought this to the council because actually we had all said we wanted to be accessible to the folks in the town who did want to speak, and part of that accessibility is that they could speak as council
I'm not
people.
saying eliminate it, just move it to a different.
I understand that. I'm trying to finish. Okay. So we would be accessible early in the meeting to people who wanted to come and speak about things that were not on the agenda and that was important, that were important to the town and that they could bring to us. So I would not be in favor of that idea for that reason, and not because for any other reason that those people bring important things to these meetings which help us structure decisions. And we did actually have a long discussion about that at that time. So I would ask you to consider those things.
Well, I think we are, Greg, but I think as Phil said, we're not eliminating it, just moving it to a different part of the meeting, and there's still certainly opportunity, plenty of opportunity for the public to comment, let alone the fact that on any given day, a member of the public, if they do have a serious issue, can contact us and email us. So I don't see us foreclosing on anyone's opportunity to speak at a meeting. So I'm still fine with it.
With respect, Mr. Mayor, I would respond to that and say, as I said, these things are things which are not on the agenda. So things that they would speak to would relate to things that were on the agenda or brought up for ordinance. These things are things that they feel, the township people feel, not on the agenda, but things that are important. And I agree with you, they have throughout the meeting other things which are brought as a portion of the meeting that they speak directly to at that time. But these things that they bring to the meeting, which are important to members of the community, residents and taxpayers, seem to be a very important thing.
I think there's a misunderstanding, Greg. The proposal isn't to eliminate it, it's to move it and combine it along with comments from the public. So it would be comments from the public on items listed on the agenda and presentations, and resident requested presentations. So somebody would be free to come to speak about the agenda, or they could come and speak about whatever's on their mind as they typically do. Well,
I agree. I agree that there's a miscommunication here. Okay. The reason that is of value is because if we have, say, a 2-hour meeting, then anyone who wants to speak about something that is not on the agenda, then they themselves have to wait 2 hours to do that. And I will tell you that in the previous council, having been a person who came to that previous council and previous councils before that, the difference between the previous council was that you had to wait 2.5 hours to speak about something that's important. Whereas the people who were residents and taxpayers in our construct, the one that we set, the one that we said we would open to, would be able to speak within about half an hour. So at the beginning of the meeting, so it will be convenient for the residents and taxpayers. Thank you, and that's all I have to say.
thanks, Greg. I appreciate that. Anyone else want to?
Now, I have to say, I'm kind of conflicted about this. I do agree that we had reinstated that portion of the meeting for a reason, and a good reason. On the other hand, sometimes that part of the meeting has been co-opted and really just kind of drawn out to a point where it makes it difficult for us to then continue on and get our business done. I wouldn't want to move it to the end, but perhaps we can look at ways to kind of make that go along a bit more expediently, maybe a time limit, maybe, to have someone sign up in advance, because they know if they're planning on coming to the meeting, they can, send an email maybe earlier in the day and say, I'd like to come and speak about a certain issue. So I'd like to consider other options personally before we decide to change the agenda format.
Of course, thank you.
We could always, maybe even go back to having, our four monthly meetings, instead of 2 monthly meetings, go back to 4 monthly meetings where 2 are just workshops and residents requesting presentations, and then that way our actual meetings are the business of the town and not anything else. Just a thought out there, just an idea.
Also, speaking to what Victoria just said, as you know, everything in regards to the council meeting that we do is related to Robert's Rules of Order, and Patty can correct me if I'm wrong, because Patty is our Robert's Rules of Order person, but I also have ran meetings and been a parliamentarian of Robert's Rules of Order, and I'm aware that this council has the ability, and Victoria, great suggestion, to say that we would limit that discussion of any one person to 3 minutes, or 2 minutes, or whatever value it is. And I think that would be a valuable measure to go maybe meet both ideas. 3 minutes, maybe, and actually I think past councils have done that.
Yeah, but then you get into someone has something to say, you're cutting off, and I don't want to get into a situation where we have a timer and a light, and okay, you stop talking. But it looks like we all have an opinion on it. We're not going to make a decision tonight. I appreciate Mr. Garwood for putting it out there, and Scott for getting it on the agenda. We'll keep the conversation on that moving, and let's go on to our second item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I can also put together some options, reach out to some of my colleagues and see what other towns are doing. Second thing we have on the workshop agenda tonight, and in the audience today is Kathy Ward, the chairperson of Sustainable Morristown. Asked her to come tonight. Her and I, members of the Green Team, Mayor Fiacco, Mr. Newcomer, have been discussing solar possibilities in the township, and asked Kathy to come tonight to sort of give the same presentation to council as a whole that Greg and Chris and myself have all been privy to. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. All right, as Scott and the Mayor know, this was a very detailed presentation, so I'm going to start kind of up front with a summary, and then you stop me if I'm going too long beyond that. But basically, Sustainable Morristown is charged, well, we are charged with finding ways of enhancing the township's economy, community, and environment, which are the 3 sustainability platforms. And what we did in this particular charge is we focused on ways in which we could reduce not only the amount of energy that the township is using, but also the cost of that energy. And we have identified some ways to reduce the energy usage, but this particular, what I'm going to be talking about tonight, is to reduce the township's costs. And to sum up our initial findings, which are based on decent conservative assumptions, but are not as specific as they will need to be, we found that there is absolutely no reason why we could not have significant benefits from going forward and looking at a solar project of any size. We found that there's a variety of ways that we can cover most, if not 100%, of our energy use in the township. And by that I mean the energy usage of each municipally owned building in the township. And we have a reasonable scenario for covering not only 100% of those costs, but actually generating a positive cash flow of significant quantity. So I will not be going into the great detail tonight that we showed in the spreadsheets we discussed, but we're at the point where it is, and it is our recommendation, that it is worthwhile to hire professionals in solar who can then get to the very specifics here that we need to vet, because there's a lot of detail. But basically, just by way of background, the township uses approximately 5 megawatts of electricity every year over its various metered accounts. It has numerous metered accounts at buildings which are owned by the township. I want to continue to emphasize that because we don't include, in terms of what we were talking about, where we were putting solar projects, we could not include places that the township doesn't own. For example, where the police and fire are renting, or the policemen are renting space. We made certain basic assumptions as far as the average commercial rate at which we pay for electricity, although we did have our actual bills to go by, and we worked off of those. We were also very heartened, and this has increased dramatically. What I think the township can benefit from is that in 2013, the state legislature passed a law that stabilized the solar renewable energy credits, SRECs. I don't know how many of you follow it, but when they first came out, they were all over the place, basically. They started maybe around $60, they went up to $300, they came back down. So it really broke the market for a while, so consequently the legislature stepped in and stabilized them. At this point, they're about $140 a credit, and that's important because we are actually paid that money depending on how much we generate in solar renewable energy. In addition, the legislature allowed us to aggregate municipal accounts within a 5-mile radius of the production site. And that means that we can basically take one site and cover all of the electricity uses for all the buildings that the township owns, even though they're not right there on the same site. So that's actually another important benefit. Plus, it encourages development of these solar renewable facilities on brownfields, and conversely discourages development on undeveloped land. Another related development this year is that EPA has come out with a new program that they call their Repowering America initiative, and they have an incredibly detailed website which supports these types of projects on contaminated property or brownfields. So that's another thing that we thought was particularly important to look at, especially considering that you can get a $200,000 grant for planning these projects if you meet those criteria, which we would, depending on what one of the options we looked at is selected. So basically, we looked at every site where we had a roof, okay, every site where we owned a roof that we could put solar on. There was no site that we identified that we could put solar on the ground that, with one caveat, and that was a sewage treatment plant, which we basically stayed away from, given that it's my understanding there was some looking at that in the past and it wasn't received well. So we basically stayed away from anything that would be overly controversial, and frankly, that would all be gravy if we decide to look at that in the future. We also picked property based on some other assumptions, that the township would not have significant land acquisition costs in the event that we identified a brownfield site, that the township-owned buildings were structurally suitable for rooftop solar array. Again, confirmation of that would have to come from a solar professional, but we did consider that. We assumed that the new town hall would not have a solar array, mostly because we had not vetted that with the township ahead of time. We didn't know what kind of opinions there would be on that. Although I do understand that Reagan's group did put in the connections that we could if we wanted to. We also, every site would have to have electricity interconnections readily available so that we could get the solar generated electricity to the grid so that we didn't incur significant development costs that way. And of course, one of our assumptions is that the SRECs remain available and fairly constant in their value. They are for a 15-year term, by the way, by their nature, and then they're renewed. Okay. So, we looked at several scenarios, and in looking at each of the properties that the township owns and can control the roof, we found that each property had a significant ability to have solar on the roof that would generate anywhere from 60% to 100% of the usage of that particular building. There wasn't any particular roof, though, that gave us a significant amount of energy that would allow us to try to do something else with it. So consequently, we just focused on the individual roofs. So we did have, like I said, with all those assumptions that we made, we did come up with some financial projections that made us believe that those could be very valuable. And it's still worthwhile to look at the individual projects, but it's not quite a home run, which is what we were really looking for, to see if we could find. But again, we should not rule those out, in our opinion. We did identify one property that we think, although it has some hair on it, could potentially be a very significant home run for the township. And that is a site on New Albany Road, the former polarizing services site, which had undergone a significant environmental cleanup that EPA funded, the federal EPA. It has a lien on it in excess of $1 million. However, the former solicitor for the township did look at that site and felt that he could do a tax foreclosure and get rid of the lien in the process. And that is definitely a possibility. To do a little further investigation, I made some blind calls to the EPA because there are some other liens out there that could come up later because of the significant amount of money that was spent. And the EPA said that they would, they generally do not pursue those additional needs. They're called, and there's a public use for the property, which is what we are contemplating. Another interesting thing is that the site is composed of 2 parcels, one of which we would not have to touch at all, and one which is about 15 acres, and we would only have to use half of that. And there's a possibility of using the remaining about 7+ acres for something else if the township was amenable to that. But the ground-mounted solar array that we looked at would generate all of the township's energy uses, absolutely. It would generate 5 million megawatts, which is what we generally use, plus a little bit in excess. And the costs that we looked at to get that solar installation constructed and operational and then maintained, we addressed in 2 different ways. We looked at first what's called a power purchase agreement, and we also looked at a system which would be constructed, owned, operated, maintained, and insured by the township. So those 2 approaches to the solar system are significantly different in terms of the cash outlay that has to come from the township, but also significantly different in the benefits to the township, because the money flows to, basically a greater portion of the money resulting from the savings flows to whichever entity is financing. So there's benefits to both ways. With regard to the PPA, basically what that involves is we, as a township, would grant a private party a license to install the facility on the property. Then the agreement provides that the township pays for electricity at a specified rate. There would be stepped up increases over time, but generally these contracts last for about 15 years. And then third describes what happens to the solar system after the PPA term expires. In that case, typically they're sold for fair market value or purchased for sold for fair market value. There's a lot of finer points to this which I really won't go into, and those would have to be brought up or identified by our solar professional and then negotiated with the supplier. And in all of these situations, it all contemplates that the solar professional that the township retains would be sort of like an engineer, could be an environmental consultant, who would advise the township on the numerous decisions that would have to be made ahead of time, and then help the township draft the RFP that would have to follow for the solar provider then to bid on, so that we could pick the best approach. If we were to go the alternate route, and that is to own the system ourselves, then that would require us to come up with the financing for the system. That amount of money would be substantial. By our calculations, we were coming up with amounts in the range of $9 million. That would, in the event that we bonded that would be probably the primary option. There are private financing companies that we identified. We actually got a quote from one for the purposes of what we were doing, who gave us leasing options then for installing the equipment, and then we would basically pay them over time, over the course of 30 years, basically. We pay them back. And then what we did is, once we had those costs locked in, then we looked at the savings that we would incur by not having to pay electricity costs, and then we looked at the other costs that we were going to incur, which involved insuring the improvements, maintenance, and any other related operational costs. And with those, with all those assumptions and all those parameters, we ended up with a situation where, again, this is basically a best-case scenario, but not unreasonable. We ended up with a situation where we had a positive cash flow from day one, and depending on the value of the SRECs, which is what basically gives us a lot of supports a lot of that cash flow, is we could see anywhere from minimum cash flow up to over $500,000 a year by the end of the 30th year, and possibly significantly before that if the SREC values continue about 140. So again, I just want to emphasize that all of this has to be vetted, has to be looked into in much more detail by professionals, but we were able to find enough information that we feel fairly confident, very confident, in recommending that this is something that we pursue as a township.
Does the green team have, thanks Kathy, does the green team have Does the green team have a recommendation as far as PPA or the, if you said it, I apologize, or us owning the equipment?
We stopped short of recommending it, but, you know, we were extremely excited by the numbers we were seeing, which we went over with you in the
Yes.
meeting, and we were just, it really put stars in our eyes.
Of course.
So I have to tell you that while nobody likes to hear that we have to put up $9 million, it's, I would not rule it out. I would absolutely not rule it out, and I would love to have a professional come along and verify what we were saying would be.
So yeah, that was another question I was going to ask. And so the next step would be, if council wanted to engage a professional, excuse me, have the professional take a closer look at the two options. And then I guess that professional could also give a recommendation as well to council in terms of which direction to go in.
And I would strongly recommend, we would strongly recommend that. And again, there are grants out there for this type of work.
Yeah, I think we should obviously go for the grant. I know that Brick Township is just one of the most recent of many towns that are going this route. Been very successful. You don't hear really any stories of towns that have fallen flat by going through this process.
No, there's so much support for this. In fact, if you're interested, if you go on the EPA website for this new program initiative that they actually have a flow chart for deciding what type of solar project that goes on for 8 pages. It's ridiculous.
Wow.
So
Well, it's a hat trick, really, because you're reducing your carbon footprint,
Mhm.
you're generating your own energy, and you are, earning the township a
Well-
substantial amount of money, or saving the township a substantial amount of money.
we believe that's certainly going to be the outcome. As far as reducing the footprint, that would come if we work on some of the other things like
course.
changing over to energy efficient lights and things.
I'm sorry, and you mentioned RFP. Is there a way? Is there also a method where we could have the area of a redevelopment area? Is that a way to go as well, or is that up to our engineer and our expert to come in and tell us the best route to go?
Well, I would defer to your attorney, but redevelopment area designation does bring certain advantages.
Yeah, and with the pulverizing stick, that's something we've also talked to the Bridge Commission about as well.
Right.
If we decided to go that route, they could write the redevelopment plan for us.
I mean, to me, taking care of the liens alone is a huge benefit. And I know there's lots of programs out there, brownfields and solar fields, that the EPA is pushing, and that's, because the liens are standing in the way for a lot of things. And if we could take care of it in one full swoop, that's just a great benefit to the town. Yeah.
Well, I am very confident, based on just what I do normally and also my specific conversation with the EPA, that we could probably avoid that lien altogether. The tax foreclosure would foreclose the lien, and then the windfall lien, I believe there's a very strong likelihood that the EPA would not pursue that, especially if we're going for the solar project, because they're pushing that. So it's to their benefit.
I want to thank you, Kathy, for coming to this meeting and for all the expertise you brought to that, and all the members of the Green Team, some of which I see are here tonight. I think you've done a great job in bringing this forward. I myself have advocated solar for the town for 6 years, and as a matter of fact, this building that we sit in has solar panels on it, which we expect the heat to be very much a benefit of and lower cost of the town. And council, remember in your packet tonight, this is on the packet that I gave you on the value of solar on July 16th, last year, it's a year ago, which you said that would be great if we move forward, and I'm glad we're starting to move forward.
So let us know if there's anything else that we can do, but at this point, we won't be proceeding unless we have a specific request.
Yeah, well, again, and to reiterate Greg's words, thank you so much. And I think you would do a great job, Kathy, and to have someone of your experience in this area donating your time to this is really just extraordinary, and I really can't thank you enough.
That's very nice of you to say.
Yeah, and council, I know Chris and Greg are obviously big proponents of this, and I don't think, you don't expect to hear anybody going in the other direction. Right now, we currently have a couple different professionals who may fit into the role of consultant, but I don't know, as I sit here, that any of them have the level of expertise in solar that we would be looking for. And in the event that they don't, and we would search out someone that has a high level of expertise, obviously council would need to appoint someone that they don't already hold an appointment with the township. So,
Yeah, I called around, I'm gonna cut you off, after the first meeting with Kathy and the Green Team, I called around the towns, mayors, the county, the Bridge Commission, to try to get some names, because you always try to, same thing like you do with your house, try to get a recommendation. One name kind of rose to the forefront, and I'd like the council to consider appointing them as our, I don't know about special engineer, but for the project of solar, but that's Mazer Engineering, and I heard good things about them. I spoke with Kathy about it. They have a connection in town, and I think that's somebody we should consider appointing as our solar engineer.
yeah, ironically, they're actually we're the consulting firm that worked with Brick on their recent project. One of the things I liked about, I was reading the story today, trying to see what else was out there new in the world of municipal solar. Brick did do their solar on top of a converted landfill. And one of the things that Mazer brought to the table there was an environmental engineering aspect that helped them deal with those extra hurdles, which of course, if we do go forward on the pulverizing site, it is a former brownfield site itself. Having a firm that has the solar experience and the environmental expertise obviously would be a huge help.
Would this be a process where we would want to go out to RFP to make sure that we do have the cutting edge, which we would want, of course, down the cutting edge solar group, but Mazer being one, certainly I know of them. I also know of other solar folks who work with Angelini and other, I can name a bunch of solar contractors and engineers. Would we want to go out and find it, or what would be the best process, Scott?
If we go out for an RFP or an RFQ, obviously that's going to take some time. And I don't believe that we have to go out for that. I mean, it's, I think collectively we can put our heads together and do the research to see who's done what. When it comes to someone actually building, us working with someone either in the power purchase agreement or building a forest, at that point, yes, we would either have to go out and bid or do it RFP at that point, depending on which direction council wants to go.
I'm all for putting our heads together.
I want somebody who we can, who's got a track record. It's my opinion. Phil, Victoria, or Stacy, you want to chime in?
Yeah, I think we can probably do the research on our own in this case. I think there's not a lot of groups that are doing this, so we can probably eliminate and identify the ones that we want to work with pretty easily.
I agree. That's great.
So what we can do is collectively, individually, and then I'll collect all the information. I think it should be a simple process. Look to see who's been successful in doing municipal solar. Probably there's a couple different examples of successful municipal solar projects in Greg's handout. We can probably look beyond that, and then I can contact them, have them put together a small packet of information for council to consider at the next meeting.
Yeah, I would suggest that Somerset County, by the way, has enormous success in the construct that Kathy talked about, which it just doesn't involve solar. It's an enormous benefit in financing. So, all things that we need to look at. So that those are of value.
All right, so if I'm hearing council correctly, we're moving ahead in a baby step. That we support this initiative, and we're going to start identifying professionals who can help guide us along the way. And maybe we can get together our list by the next meeting and compare notes so that we can maybe fast track this, get this done to, because to me it sounds like it's a win, and it's something we want to get done right away. Okay, great. Thanks, everybody, and we can move to your
Next topic, and thanks again, Kathy. Next topic is, we discussed at the last meeting that at tonight's meeting, Mr. Reagan and myself would share a recommendation with council on what to do with the now old, now former library building. And we had touched upon some of the issues at the last meeting, the meeting before that, with the simple fact that it's a 40-year-old building that would require, for any change of purpose, would require that it be brought up to code. And those improvements to bring it up to code would be roughly $3.5 million. That's prior to deciding to fit it out. Now, we're not really prepared to make a recommendation in terms of what should be there. I've been a proponent of a green space, but a green space is something that doesn't take a lot of money to create, and it's something that if future council decides to do something different there, green space is not going to really be an impediment from doing that. So Rick's the professional. I'll let him take it from here, and congratulations on the library TCO. And council, by the way, I know we were having problems with email, we discussed it earlier. We did try to send Rick's report also to your other email address. Did everybody get a chance to get that? If not,
well, there are
it's
copies
about it on the TV screen.
But there are also copies in front of you, I understand.
Yes, and there is no attachment online. Digesting this is, that's quite a lot to digest.
Yes, and it is not the intention that you need to make any decisions this evening. The total concept was to pull out of the study that was really focused on the police and court, those portions that we studied for the library, and present those this evening for your consideration without any notion of you having to do anything except think about it. Okay? So let's start with the current library as it exists in terms of its current building facility, what it would cost to fix it up. I'd like to talk about the impact of reuse of that library for several other uses, whether it's an office, a library, or something else, because it has an impact on the parking scenario in this complex, and then end with our suggestion. So you'll see some figures this evening, which I know you haven't seen, no one's seen, so please just let me run through it and then we'll go on. The current existing old library, it has a 5,700 square foot basement, a 19,900 square foot first floor, and an 11,000 square foot mezzanine. The library has a steel frame structure bearing on cast-in-place concrete foundation with a cement stucco finished concrete masonry exterior walls and a steeply pitched precast concrete plank roof finished with glazed tiles. The building is equipped with wood casement windows, some fixed, some operable, and are all original, meaning 40 years plus. Although the building's superstructure is in fact strong, very strong, stalwart, the existing enclosure, mechanical and energy management, electrical and communication systems have become outmoded by technologies developed in the last 40 years. In addition, the deferred maintenance and mechanical and some of the building enclosure elements have resulted in building components that have become beyond repair. For instance, the clay tile roof has suffered for many years of branches overlying the top of it and detritus and leaves getting in there and then freezing. This pops the tiles. When you pop the tile, you're creating an opportunity for water to get in. In fact, the library suffered from water leaks for 15 years prior to getting this new facility that you all decided to build. Those leaks are still there. And we put people on the roof to try and fix some of those leaks as an interim measure a year and a half ago. And every time a guy went on the roof, he cracked more tiles. So every time you turn around, you're creating a problem that was not getting better, but getting worse. Also, with regard to the building ductwork system, as we all know, it was not being cleaned regularly, filters were not changed regularly, and consequently we had an aroma that is now legend.
And I'm happy to say it did not follow us.
That's correct. The likely likelihood of rehabilitating and modernizing this system would exceed the cost to replace it and put a new system in. And as such, any responsible adaptive reuse of the building would require complete removal and replacement of the roof, certain windows and doors, exterior finishes, electrical system, and mechanical system. Some conditions that are also inherent to this building are the existing building is configured as a main level with an open mezzanine. The idea was it was a future expansion area, but as an open mezzanine, of course, if you had a fire in the building, it just goes right up to the second floor. If you were thinking of using the second floor, then you'd have to close it in. That has a cost. The mezzanine was never really outfitted with proper lighting, windows, or electrical, even though we had our construction office over there and they enjoyed the extra space. It was, in fact, not really very safe, candidly. The mezzanine was designed as a future space and it was never equipped. So the existing elevator cab is another function, is undersized for modern methods. In other words, you could not put a person in that cab if they needed to be carted down from the second floor on a stretcher because it's undersized by ADA standards. And the existing sprinkler system would have to be significantly modified for any person that would be, any use that would be coming in there. So let's take a look at what the cost would be just to fix the building up to something that would begin to create a proper shell.
Prior to fit out.
Prior to fit out. That would be selective demolition and mezzanine closure, $500,000. Roof demolition for concrete planks that are broken, need to be repaired, $50,000. New roof, $300,000. New mechanical system for the entire area, $650,000. Electrical, about the same. Plumbing, not too many plumbing changes, $10,000. Perimeter finishes, you could start at $300,000 and go to $1 million if you wanted to make it look like the outside of this building. But we put in $300,000. New larger windows for extra light, because if you had any kind of offices, you would need extra windows. New doors, $20,000. Mezzanine dormers, $200,000, and new elevator and shaft, $150,000. That puts us at a subtotal of about $2.8 million. Architecture and engineering at $165,000. Contingency at $280,000. You're looking at $3,415,000. Now, once the building gets to that point, we used the number as a budget when we did our estimating for this building of $180 a foot for fitting out on top of that. So if you're going to make it an office building or something else, you have to spend another $180 a foot. So if you spend $180 a foot just on the 19,000 square feet, you would be adding about $1.9 million. And if you added the Justice Center, you would add another $1.1 million. So this building could climb to almost $6.7 million by the time you get finished making it look like something you'd be proud of.
Rick, wouldn't, I mean, to put anything in that space, in that building, that's going to have any significant parking or traffic. We talked about this, I think we brought up the council before, and looking at that as a potential safety for the police and court, because of the amount of parking we have currently now in the new complex and the amount of parking, we could potentially be looking at building a garage, which
yes.
now the costs are just skyrocketing into the upper atmosphere.
I do address that if you let me just keep going. Thoughts on reuse. The reuse of the library as a police station and court has serious limitations from a rehabilitation cost point of view as well as traffic and parking impact for the site. The police require 60 vehicles with 30 requiring gated or secured parking as a major impact on the space. Additionally, the court requires approximately 100 parking spaces for their sessions. Day sessions would be impossible, though evening sessions would work. However, the library received a 20% increase in its membership in anticipation of the new building, and the recreation programs are expanding as a result of the improvements to the recreation building. So our recommendation, not to be too bold too early, would be to demolish the existing library and construct something. Tom, go to the town hall site capacity. To build on Mr. Carew's comments, here's what our parking capacity is with regard to the facility we have here. The current number of spaces for this complex is now 151 spaces. The current daytime demand with library programs and normal administration is approximately 120 cars per day. 20 for administration, 30 for guests, 12 for library staff, and 58 additional usable spaces. Recreation parking during the evening with a full basketball program, 20 spaces, weightlifting, 10 spaces, town and council or planning board and zoning board, 30 to 50 spaces, and library, 40 to 50 spaces, which again puts us in the 100 to 120 space category. If we were to follow every town's zoning rules, which say you should park 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet, or an 18,000 square foot administration building would require 72 spaces, and for 4 spaces per 1,000 of the library, minus the stacks and the non-public areas, would be another 60 spaces, so we would need 132 spaces. Town council chambers, these chambers, we have a capacity for 156 seats, plus standing room, and on the rare occasions where controversial issues arise, all seats may be occupied, and we would probably need another 50 to 70 spaces. Obviously, if we're going to have 300 people, 400 people, you would adjourn this to the high school. The impact of the alternate reuses of the existing library. People had suggested, why can't we use the library for an office space? If we used just the first floor of the existing library for an office space, 19,000 square feet, close to 20,000 square feet, would be converted for office. The parking impact would be 76 full-time, all-day parking spaces. If the user was any kind of a phone call service where you have additional employees, you would have to add another 20 or so, 24 spaces to that to get you 100 spaces. As noted above, our total supply of parking spaces is 151. Our internal average demand is 120. Adding 76 to 120 puts us at 196, and this puts us out of space for our complex. From a traffic congestion point of view, our AM and PM peak hour impact on North Church Street and 2nd Street would drop from a level C to D and in the AM and to E in the PM. So we would have quite a backup at 2nd and Church. Okay, some say let's do retail space. With extensive renovation, it is theoretically possible to make this a retail building. I don't agree that this is even modestly possible because the location is not on Main Street. It has limited exposure. Nevertheless, for the purpose of an exercise, to assume that 19,000 square feet would be used for retail. The total daytime, 10 a.m. through 8 p.m. in the evening or closing, would be 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet, or 95 spaces. This would also be true on Saturday. The impact would be similar on our parking of 120 spaces for our uses and 95 for the new use, which would be 215 spaces, which would put us out of spaces. The traffic impact at the AM peak would be negligible because stores would not open until 10 a.m. The evening peak hour, however, would have a similar impact as people trying to get to the stores after work, etc., and having traffic would continue for an extra 2 or 3 hours longer as patrons come back to the stores at 5, 6, or 7 o'clock. The loss of parking to our taxpayers for the library administration and recreation functions, in my opinion, makes this less desirable. The third alternative had been suggested by using the building for an existing a performing arts center. The Kitchen and Associates, the architects on board before us, prepared plans for this use with a budget that they came up with of $5.4 million. There's no doubt that a theater community in Morristown is very strong and numerous performances entertained each year. These functions are scattered throughout the school auditoriums now and appear to function well. The existing library uses $68,400 in energy, which Kathy can get rid of hopefully, but $68,000 is a lot of money before you're paying rent, before you're doing any fix-up. The Performing Arts Program is undefined, therefore, in terms of the uses of parking and the general demand. We are in favor of this kind of use as well as the senior center, but not necessarily in this edifice. The impact of police and court on the town hall site is further exacerbated by the fact that the total parking demand would be 166 spaces. The parking impact of the police, which we're going to skip now, Tom, to sheet number 9, shows that the police have 10 marked police cars, 9 unmarked police cars, 10 SUVs, 1 prisoner van for transport, 1 armored van, message board trailers, which are quite long, barricade trailers. They require enclosed garage bays for evidence of vehicles and for stolen bikes. They have on-duty staff, private vehicle count of 10, and a support staff of 10, and visitor vehicles anywhere from 4+. So that's 60 spaces that they need on a regular basis. The courtroom has the following parking requirements: 3 staff vehicles, 3 police officer vehicles, and about 80 spaces for a normal court hearing. Additional contingency for parking on heavy court days is anticipated to be another 20, which takes you to 106 spaces for court. So the judge has indicated that her normal attendance requires 140 seats, and court and staff, meaning police officers and court staff, of another 8 persons. The above information indicates that some of the long-term storage parking is necessary for the message board trailers, barricades, evidence vehicles, etc., as Mr. Newcomer said, needing a garage. And secondly, the 60 spaces are a realistic approach to the size of the department. Therefore, the total land area required to handle 166 parking spaces and 1.5 acres to 2 acres of land. Court parking could be reduced to 60 spaces provided there's overflow parking available. So we're looking for the police and justice center for 1.5 acres to 2 acres of land with the capability of having some enclosure in the future for, or even now, for evidence and the other kind of vehicles that they have accumulated over time that have now become a necessity. Our recommendation, therefore, for the old library is that it remain standing for a short duration. This is part of that duration, to permit the proper transition into both the new library and town hall. What we've discovered, of course, is there's an unbelievable amount of file boxes everywhere. And those file boxes we would like to have transferred into microfilm or even CDs so that the community development activity and construction office and court activity perhaps could be reduced to a reasonable storage facility. One of the transitions that has been made, once this transition has been made, then we recommend demolishing the building. Demolishment will require a strategic operation so as not to impose on the new parking lot and to minimize demolition activity along Church Street. The demolition shall remove the entire building, including the foundations. Once the building is removed, the site would be graded in a gentle slope towards this new building as an informal lawn and hopefully graded so it could act as an amphitheater or some outdoor activity, as well as a view to this building from the corner of 2nd and Church. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. That was very comprehensive and informative, that's for sure. I think the report speaks for itself.
Thank you.
Council, any comments or questions?
I thank you for doing that, and I think you've done a great job. It's the question I get asked most now. What are you doing with the old library? What's happening? This kind of puts to rest, I think, some of those things that people have been been talking about. As a retailer, I don't think it's a great spot to put retail stores. First of all, you have no space to show your store on Church. So you'd be showing Scott Carew every day, your storefront.
Got by things.
Well, actually, Tom and Pat are on that
Oh,
side.
that's
of the
right,
building.
Tom Patty.
If it's a coffee shop, they'll make good money.
So, as a retailer, I think that would be a difficult sell.
Absolutely.
And one that parking spots, I think, would be, a problem. And then you go into the Performing Arts Theater, which I think this town, one of the things that this town is known for, besides our incredible volunteers like Kathy, which make this town special, is the fact that we have a great education, great school system, and great community. And I think the other thing is our theater. I mean, I think that's one thing that we can rest our laurels on. We have a great theater community. So I do like the idea of having a theater thing going on. And I know I had talked to you earlier, and I talked to a couple of people on council, in particular, and Scott, you've discussed this before too, is doing something like that. But when you show those numbers, 3.4 million just to get it up to code.
Yes.
Those numbers are staggering.
It's daunting.
And that's just to get it to code. That's not even doing what you want to do to make it that performing arts.
And if I can interrupt, the building isn't even configured for it. There's so many columns in there, it would be difficult to lay out seating.
Right. And I talked to actually Mark Morgan has talked to me about doing something there, and he and I have gone back and forth about it. But the other option that I have talked about is actually, and this is not anywhere like the next foreseeable future, meaning next year or two. This is something I'd like to see down the road happen, and that is doing a nice addition to our recreation center, because if we do take that building down, which it seems to be the way we seem to be leaning, the way it's cut off at the rec center is just, it's like we took a saw and just chopped it in half and said, okay, we have it go. So it would be nice to have an addition there, and maybe having a stage, auditorium, so that people could in the community come in and do some little theater and things like that. I'm not suggesting a big, huge theater, but it's just something that we could.
Even just a practice facility.
Something like the school auditoriums where they put on their little shows at the auditoriums. The high schools. I mean, that's Greg, you know about that, the lighting and the sound.
You're singing my song, I'm not going to stop.
Well, the problem, and I haven't talked to Mark a lot about this before as well, and we run our own theater program in the summer. I think a smaller practice area would work. The problem with doing something large is obviously it's taking up space. I do know that there is concern because we have two very large publicly funded auditoriums in the middle school and the high school. But the problem is the non-high school or middle school programs have difficulty, even though they can use them for a weekend show, to have practice during the week when there's school activities. That does become difficult.
And this is more just opening up the dialogue and getting it going, because obviously we have more important things in my mind, police and court, that we need to take care of first and foremost. But I'm glad this dialogue is being open, that we can maybe talk about this, and it's out there so that we can kind of massage it a little bit and figure out how we want to go with it. But I appreciate you doing this, because this really has put to rest, in my mind, a lot of the problems, or not problems, but a lot of the things that people have asked me what it could be used for. And now we have some answers that we can give definite answers to. So I just wanted to say thank you, and I'm looking forward to the next phase.
I'd like to say thank you too. I think it's, as Stacy pointed out, it's a lot of the contingencies to rest, and I think the writing's on, it's there, but I think it's something we've got to take a good long look at and look forward to the next step.
I would put forth that the former library building, which I happen to have done a lot of research on, and I've worked on at times. Actually, I got one of the local contractors to fix the air conditioning, which was on the lower floor, the fan, about 15 years ago, because it was not cleaned, which may have gone towards the smell. Had a lot of problems, has a lot of problems. Also, in its favor. It's sized as a size 5 tornado building built in a civil defense area. But actually, this building here can house, I believe, 1,500 people. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And that would be a shelter as well. And people have brought that to me, the idea that that was a very solid structure. I think those historic issues are things that we know about for that building. One thing that hasn't been mentioned, I don't think, is that the vision of this building is kind of blocked by that building. And when you talk about architecture and planning and schematic plan, one of the things you first think about is what's your vision overall. And as I've worked on the lighting for this property, for 6 years actually, to try to make sure it's improved and seen in all areas night and day, I think that that's one value we would want to think about. I also had gone forth and tried to, as was spoken about, try to move forward the idea of having a theater, and looked into many areas that we could do that with folks in town. I talked to More Arts, I talked to MTC, I talked to other folks. You know, what I came across from that is that it would be great to have a theater facility, because we do serve the kids in the school, and we do serve the kids, the older kids, the adults who like theater a lot. There's a group of people who are very talented, who I happen to know because I was involved particularly in More Arts and the schools for 15 years, who could be bringing a great value for theater to us, who are from maybe 18 now to 30 or 35, who have a great value. And I would put forth, and thank you very much for saying theater 3 times in your presentation, put forth a value. And by the way, when you go to Sustainable Jersey, right, and you go and see what they believe is a value for the town, their sustainable options include a very big value for the arts. So I think that would be a great idea for future use. Thank you.
I'm just going to echo real fast. I mean, I think before you even get to the money issue, you get to the substantial parking issue. And if you somehow overcome that, then you're staring at $3.4 million before you fit it out. And I'll put it out there now. I don't support spending a dime of that money. But we certainly aren't making a decision now. Thank you very much.
Well, I don't really have much to add that hasn't already been said. Thank you for a very comprehensive report. I think, in my mind, it's clear what we need to do with that building. Despite its value as a bunker, which Greg pointed out, it's certainly kind of interrupting the sight line of this beautiful new building, and so I think it needs to go. And I also agree, a future project to somehow find a way to make that space accommodate the arts would be wonderful. I think there's great arts programs in our town. I would patronize and participate in those, but obviously we have some more important projects on the horizon that in the future I think we should consider that.
Council, I know Rick, probably the one thing I disagree with Rick on in that whole presentation was that he said you guys don't have to make a decision tonight. I don't think the decision is difficult based on the research that Rick did, and all the discussions we've had over the last 18 months on this building. We did put money for a down payment for demolition of the building in the capital budget. When I was talking to Tom earlier today, he's going to look to see how much money, because with this project, we've come in under the contingency. If council would even need to bond for demolition of that building. But if council's ready to provide direction that we begin moving forward with this process, I don't know too many people that would be upset about that.
Well, that sounds fine to me. Making the decision, why wait?
I would think it would be very important that we take what value there is out of the building and make sure to use that in the demolition, or make it a value that we keep in that demolition contract. For instance, the air conditioning didn't work for a long time in that building, and then when we decided that we were going to close this building, we took the very valuable compressor over there, and the air conditioning's worked great over there since that happened, and continuously, so that has value. And there's a lot of other value, like the concrete. Mr. Reagan can tell you that concrete has value. We should very much make sure we're getting the value out of demolition, and plan well to do that, in my mind. I certainly think you're well experienced in that now, Mr. Manager.
All right, well, what I'm hearing is, well, I think I'm hearing, I'm guessing we're greenlighting to demolish the library. All right, let's move in that direction. Thank you, everybody, and I appreciate everyone making a decision on that. Okay, Scott.
All right, we have one more workshop topic tonight. We briefly alluded to the fact that a new appointment would need to be made by council at the last meeting, but it wasn't 100% definite, so we did not give too much detail. But since the last council meeting, our municipal court prosecutor, Mark Tarantino, has been given a judgeship, if that's the correct phrase. And while it's great for Mark, both as a longtime prosecutor for the township and as a resident, to achieve that honor, it does leave a huge hole, and council is going to have to choose a prosecutor. We have an alternate prosecutor that can fill in the interim, but Mark's appointment is effective, I believe, very soon, so that's already coming back. So, yeah, council's got any recommendation? I know that we have a blank resolution on for the consent agenda, but if that's a discussion council's ready to have now, if you do come to a conclusion, you can appoint a new prosecutor this evening.
I was wondering if there anybody that's familiar with any attorneys in town that might be.
Well, I am.
It seems to me, I would say, not to be facetious, but I seem to think we have a plethora of attorneys in town. And having a town attorney is something that I have always felt was a high value, as I do with all employees who are employed in the town. I think it's a great idea to have someone who lives in the town also be the attorney. And Mr. Tarantino, I think, is a great example of that. He served the town well, and other past attorneys. So when we think about this, maybe it would be a good idea for us to let folks know who are in the town who are attorneys, many of them who are, such as our mayor, proficient people in the field.
I don't think that's a local prosecutor who serves many towns, and I have utmost respect for. I don't know whether he lives in town or not, but I'm not going to hold that against him anyway. His name is Dan Key. I like him to be considered. I believe he's a prosecutor in St. Louis and a few other neighboring towns, and I hear very good things about him. Judge Downey knows who he is, and she supports him, so that's who I like to back.
Chris, that same name popped up in some of my talks too. Dan is very, very highly recommended in the area. I would be willing to back that nomination as well.
Okay.
I don't know Dan personally, but if our judge feels that he would be a good pick, I have a lot of faith in judgment, so I feel comfortable with that.
Is this a name that our judge has given to you? Because I just know that our judge has done a fantastic job past couple of years making sure that court runs smoothly, and has done a great job, and her recommendations would be somebody high on my list. So.
Yeah, she shared that with me as well.
Okay, so then I'm fine with that.
All right, so we have a consensus on council, and how do we go about appointing Mr. Gay? Is there a motion?
Well, I guess, Patty, we would just have to amend the resolution that's number 147. There's no name on it. I guess we just attach the name.
Okay. Is that by motion?
Patty, how would you like to do it?
Just to join in the discussion of Mr. Gee, I don't know Mr. Gee. I don't have any background on him. I have no idea about him, and so I would not want to vote negative, so I would abstain from any vote for that because I don't have the information. And as I said, I would prefer a person from the town. Thank you.
Appreciate that, thank you.
Patty, what process to?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, folks. Minutes and approval of expenditures, there are none, so we will go to comments from the public on items listed on the agenda. If you have a comment on an agenda item, please come forward, state your name. Yeah.
My name is Margot Foster, 129 Summers Avenue. I have 3 questions in regard to maintenance of this wonderful new facility. Mr. Reagan mentioned that the old library wasn't very well maintained, apparently. So my question is this: is there a maintenance plan for public buildings, including this
There is a
one?
maintenance plan for the HVAC, which we all worked on.
I don't know what that means.
The air conditioning.
Okay.
And there is a plan for that. And I think actually council discussed having some other type of plan for the rest of the building a little bit the last time that I know of, Mr. Manager.
Is there a person in charge of maintenance?
Public Works will be ultimately responsible for maintenance of the building.
Do they have a plan?
They have a plan, and what Mr. Newcomer was trying to say is there's several different levels of maintaining a building. There's actual maintenance, which includes things like changing the filters and doing the upkeep of the HVA system, the heating air conditioning system, which in this building is substantial. For 10 years, and this is something that we've been dealing with for the last couple of council meetings. For last meeting, council entered into a contract for 10 years to have that maintenance, that specific maintenance, which is the majority of the major maintenance, to take place. There's also custodial cleaning, the general cleanup, and we do have that outsourced as well. If things pop up that are somewhere in the middle, not quite level to deal with the contractual maintenance and not quite custodial work, then Public Works would be responsible, would address it.
Okay, is that a budgeted item?
Well, if I can interrupt, we have a 2-year warranty from the contractor for any repairs that are necessary, and that's part of the cost of the building itself. So for 2 years, the general contractor is responsible. And then we have these maintenance contracts over and above that, as Mr. Cruz said, for 10 years. And we're looking at a contractor for the sprinkler system and for the plumbing, so that would also be taken care of. And then the general cleaning, of course, will be taken care of by the township. And other things, if other things come up as a problem, we'll be dealing with them.
Because it's really fun to build new things and that would be great, but then if they're not maintained,
Oh, you're right.
and there's a lot of things in town that are not maintained, in my opinion. So.
Mrs. Foster, as far as a lot of things in town, actually I brought up to council at last meeting, and I brought this up before, that we should look into having a computerized maintenance management system. And I've actually given copies to Mr. Michelle of possible ideas to do that, which would address emergency, priority, routine, and other types of things that we need to do in the town for all their buildings. And I really thank you for bringing this up.
Yes.
Thank you for taking care of it. I hope it works.
Thank you.
Monique Bank, 209 Parry Drive. To follow up a little bit on what Mrs. Foster said, I do hope we have a plan to clean the gutters as needed. I know at my house it needs to be done twice a year.
Who does it?
Eh?
Who cleans your gutters? Mr. Bank?
Okay, so you said yes. The gutters, that's very important. And there are other things that need to be maintained, and anybody who's had a house knows that. I'm sorry that the library was not properly maintained over many years, and I know there were many complaints about that, and I myself have had the opportunity to look at the damage on some of the books. And, well, as a person who loves books, I really took this to heart, that this was happening to collection material. You know, that's very important. So I hope that this is never going to happen again. We should have done better, but hopefully we'll learn from our mistake. I'm sorry that a building that's not that old after all should have to be demolished. Most of the homes in Morristown are older than this building, including my own house, which is not all that old. And the meeting house was built in 1802, and there are many other buildings that were built many years ago. People say they don't like that building, etc. But if you look at the articles that were written at that time, after that building was built, you know, there were many complimentary comments about that building. It has aged, it wasn't maintained, and that was its problem. And I think that people in the town don't want this ever to happen again. And so this is a beautiful building. And, you know, in the library likewise, you know, well, it's part of the same building, so I think we're very happy about that. But I think we have to look forward to doing better with what we have now.
Thank you, Mr. Begg. Actually, that's predictive maintenance that you brought up about the gutters. Predictive, and that would be addressed, the kind of thing in a computerized maintenance management system. That would be a great thing. Thank you.
Or Greg will go up there on a ladder and he'll clean the gutters for us.
I am not allowed to go with the ladder.
Mr. Begg.
Good evening. Edwin Begg, 209 Parry Drive. In referral to Mr. Drawls' suggestion or question about my cleaning gutters, years ago I decided, this is really, I'm not going to do this anymore. From the second floor. I'm here tonight. I need some reassurance about the current plan to demolish the old library building. And I have the highest regard for Mr. Reagan, what he's accomplished, his skills and talent and reputation, so I don't question that at all. But if I'm at 30,000 feet, and going back 8 years ago, before the fire, whatever it was, I see there was a town hall that worked, there was a recreation department that worked, there was a police department that worked, there was a library that worked. So now, what am I missing 8 years later that we can't reuse an old building?
I think the biggest thing that you're missing is what Mr. Reagan talked about, which is having to come up to code. If that building is used for anything else, we would have to come up to code. One of the big code changes, and Rick and Dan could correct me if I'm wrong on this, is the far more stringent DEP rules in terms of stormwater regulation that exist today that did not exist 45 years ago, 40 years ago, when the old complex was designed. And what you see on the site now is a stormwater retention basin that I think exceeds greatly from what there used to be on the site, and that's taking up a lot of square footage, which is taking up obviously a lot of the potential parking.
In addition, from my report, Mr. Begg, you saw that there's the police technology and demands have expanded also. The police were very crowded in here. They didn't have room for a lot of the items that they need to use. And some were at Public Works, some were at other places, and they were all scattered, and they had to go and go from place to place to get them. So there's a part of the question of consolidating the police and court for modern, for today's standards, and making all the technology available to them, and doing that in a way that's going to be efficient over the long run. And I think just as this building will prove to be efficient over the long run, a justice center of some kind that handles the police and court together also be efficient for the long term.
Okay, I'm not arguing. I appreciate that, for example, the only reason a couple of years ago I got a new laptop was that the other laptop I had, which was I could still use, the vendor that I counted on for my security software says we don't support that operating system anymore. So finally things just give up. But
Great
now,
analogy, Mr. Beck.
That's the great analogy. We don't support that operating system.
I can,
One more system on.
thinking of, however, the suggestion, okay, we tear it down, and I'm really not having a problem with that. What to do with it, and if we look back, say 100 years ago, and think, what buildings were here then or not, it was, well, obviously pretty sparse. So if we think of not just today or this calendar year 2014, but say in 25, 50-year increments, whatever, that this township will only have more people. The only way to have more people in a fixed amount of land finally is to build up. So if we think that there's a lot of traffic now and a lot of density downtown, relatively speaking, compared to a couple of miles out in one of the communities, that's so. But I'd like to suggest in the context of looking 25 years out and looking at the business downtown, which I think we all want to, for various reasons, personal shopping convenience, taxpayer support, what have you, that we want to encourage the development and continuing existence of the business operation downtown. One thing we will clearly, the business system will need is parking. And since the only way to get more parking is finally think conceptually of vertically, as much as it may seem, well, in that case now, talking about it, at least I'd like the council, Mr. Reagan, at least to consider the possibility after the library building is physically demolished and disappears, that some future consideration be made for that what will be vacant land that maybe, as crazy as it might sound today, that may be a good thing to consider for a multi-story parking facility.
Thank you, Mr. Beck.
Thank you.
I'm Roger Boyle, 416 Perry Drive. On the same topic of repurposing the prospective former library building, we've heard two conflicting views. One is the building should be removed to provide some green space which will afford a view of the present town hall building. Another view is that the building should be removed to afford space for construction of a theater. Let me point out that those are conflicting views. If it's a green space, it's not a theater. And if it's a theater or a performing arts center, it will likely block the view of this building. So please consider your reasons for supporting the removal of the library. Notwithstanding the foregoing, however, consider the capriciousness of the State Council on Affordable Housing. If that building turns into space, it may be considered as available space for low-cost housing. As I understand it, in round 2 or 3A or something of the Council on Affordable Housing deliberations in the past, they counted space available in the township as contribution toward low-cost housing requirements for the township. And one of the ironies was that some townships found their cemeteries were considered available space. Now, if a cemetery is considered available space, what is a green space? I would urge you not to physically demolish the prospective former library until we know what the capricious Council on Affordable Housing is likely to require. Because if it's an aerial survey that shows that's green space or parking lot, it's likely to be counted, just like a cemetery, as available for low-cost housing. We might find 100 or more units required. We don't know what their rules are going to be, but they've shown to be capricious, intrusive, and, to my mind, confiscatory in the past. We better just consider what that council might do or might not do. Thanks.
Great point. Thank you, Mr. Bueno.
Thank you.
Good evening, Nancy Newcomer, 235 Fellowship Road. I don't want to beat a dead horse here. I want to thank Rick Reagan for his comprehensive study of our old library. As someone who worked in that building for 15 years, I find it upsetting that that was okay. Sorry, I'm a little emotional. Where is the accountability? Why is it okay that we can just say, that's fine, we exposed our staff, our public, our children, our youth to the conditions in that deteriorating building? And I have not heard much that convinces me that we have a proactive program going forward. I know we're trying, but I think we do need to do more than try. We need to manage our public spaces so that they reflect the town and we can be proud of them. Frankly, the town hall probably was not managed very well and maintained very well. Neither was the library. With a leaking roof, air conditioning not working properly, gutters not cleaned. How can we feel good about that? Air ducts not cleaned. I think there should be accountability. I think our Public Works Department should develop and demonstrate a publicly available plan to maintain our public buildings going forward. I would like to see that, and I ask this council to work on that so that history doesn't repeat itself in this beautiful new complex that we have. And frankly, if we get a contract to wash the windows, I'd like to apply for that because I think that's going to be a great contract. But anyway, I apologize for my emotion around this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Newcomer. Thank you for coming up. It must be difficult. And your points are all spot on. They're all taken to heart. And God bless you for your service. And we are going to develop a plan, and these buildings aren't going to languish like the former buildings did. But thanks, I do appreciate it. I know it's difficult, and thanks for coming up.
Lisa Petriello, 266 Linden Street. I wanted to know, how much do we pay the prosecutor?
How much do you pay the prosecutor? $19,972.
Okay. All right. I was just, I guess I'm just kind of astonished that, I don't know, somebody knows somebody and we're appointing a prosecutor. Shouldn't there have been, I don't know, some sort of job posting process for that job, or no?
We follow the rules on it. We appointed somebody who's an experienced prosecutor who our judge recommended.
And did you guys, I mean, was a resume circulated or anything like that?
No.
No. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Sir. Sorry.
Gorman, 123 Augusta Drive. See if we can get 5 or for you agree with me. In reference to the prosecutor, you mentioned, Council and the Mayor mentioned before about the shared service agreements. Has that been considered instead of hiring our own prosecutor, being especially it's the same person that Cinnaminson presently has?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't shared service before with Mr. Tarantino. We've talked about shared services before across the board. You know, it's not a bad idea. We can certainly look into it. I don't know the nuances of the schedules of the courts and the fact that this gentleman also has a day job. But if there's a way to save money on it, so I would do it.
Yeah, Bob, I'm a big proponent of shared services when they make sense. I'm not sure how this would. Most prosecutors work in multiple towns, and most of them don't get paid a whole lot to work in those towns. When you do a shared service, it's typically because one town has an excess in one resource and the other town needs it. We need a prosecutor for our court dates. I'm not sure how it would be efficient for us to pay Cinnaminson in order to get their prosecutor to work our court time when we can just pay him directly.
Economy of scale.
No, it wouldn't be economy of scale. They would be charged, he has a rate, we would be charged that rate and possibly something on top of that.
They could negotiate to have both towns to get the prosecutor for the best price to cover two instead of having
But he's appointed by Cinnaminson to work for Cinnaminson. Cinnaminson can't negotiate him to be farmed out to other towns. He's not a full-time employee. He's an appointed professional.
They could do a shared service agreement. You can look into that. In reference to the renovate, what do you call it, the present building, the past building in the library, about the maintenance schedule. It was mentioned that we have a plan. But the one thing that I find in common, I think we talked about for 40 years, those buildings, in a sense, haven't been maintained. 20 of those years, we've had an acting director of public works. Is there any plan to get a full-time director of public works?
Are you saying that the fact that his title is his civil service title as acting director is the reason that the building has problems 40 years down the road?
Why? Well, he's the person in charge right now for the last 20 years. And if we're planning for the future, I would think we would plan to get a full-time, permanent public works director instead of an acting director.
So 20 years doing the job is not full-time or permanent?
Obviously, several people have mentioned about the buildings not being maintained for the last 40 years. He's in charge. So what are we doing about it?
If your issue is with his job performance, he hasn't been right to us, we're not going to discuss that tonight. If your issue is what his title on a piece of paper is, I don't see how that has anything to do with the quality of work he does or does not show.
Is there any plans to advertise for the position of Director of Public Works?
We have a Director of Public Works.
We have an acting director.
Which I'm satisfied with.
Obviously, people are not satisfied with the work that's happened in the last 20 years in the buildings. Thank you.
Mr. Gorman? I said thank you.
You're welcome. One of the things, that Mr. Mayor, is that we have in the past 20 years cut deeply into our public works. And I think that has been a problem with maintaining our buildings. And this is something that I have advocated the past 4 years on council, that we're going to have these assets, we need to maintain them. And that is, I think, a priority that I've set forth, and I think this council can set forth. And maybe, Scott, that we can see it more in a paper form that says this is, what we're going to be doing, like a schedule of things that we can do. Maybe you can sit down with Ken. You can sit down with Ken, obviously, as the manager, and let him know that that's, this is what we'd like to see done, and have a schedule so that we know, yes, this has been checked off, this has been checked off, and do something like that. But it's Mr. Gorman's point that our acting director hasn't fulfilled his job role, I think is inaccurate and is not right. It's because councils over the past 20 years have cut and cut. We used to have 80 public works employees. We're down to how many? 40, so in half. And the township has grown exponentially over that time period. Miles of roads have been added. So it's great things because the council's not doing what they need to do, and that's why this council is making sure that we maintain the assets we have, and we're going to maintain Strawbridge Lake. We're going to maintain the fields that we have. We're going to maintain our new buildings that we have and going forth. So just want to put that out there.
Yeah, I mean,
Well, also, I'd like to put a few things out there, just for what you said, and thank you very much, Ms. Deputy Mayor. Actually, a computerized maintenance management system would be an excellent thing to address going forward, exactly everything you talked about, and actually would make life easier. We would be able to do more with less, and as I've given to Mr. Michel several times, now a couple of examples of how other towns are doing this, it would be a great thing to start to discuss.
Does the computerized maintenance system mow the grass?
Mr. Carew, actually in 1988, as part of a corporation, a very large one, I was trained in a computerized maintenance management system, and for the last 10 years, I brought this to different councils that it would be a good idea. Municipalities.
So someone still has to push the mower. Someone still has to push the
That's true, but
broom.
when they push the mower, how much labor they use for it, what kind of mower, whether the value of the rest of the site is of something that we should report, such as was demonstrated by the person who came in and said her site was affected by our site. All these things are recorded. How you coordinate your assets. These things are of great value. I would strongly suggest we move forward and look at a computerized maintenance management
Well,
system.
and that may be something that helps. It's not going to be a panacea to fix the fact, as the deputy mayor pointed out, that the Public Works Department staff has been cut in half over the last 15 years, while there's been an extra 50 to 100 homes added to the township.
With respect, Mr. Manager, it is not the amount of labor, it is the process by which you use the labor that this would be of value for. I don't know how.
I don't think you and I disagree on things. It's just, all I'm saying is that the one is not going to solve the other problem, which is the staff is not what it used to be.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All good points. My name is Robert Zenick. I live at 626 East Main Street. I don't know who the director of Public Works is or the acting director, but it seems like if he's in charge of the building for the last few years and the building hasn't been maintained, is there any correspondence from him to the council saying, look, if you cut, I can't maintain these buildings, and by the way, this building over here the gutters are clogged, this isn't being done, that's not, is there any correspondence from this guy?
Mr. Zaney, if I could point out a very important fact that I think everyone's either forgetting or not aware of. The library building is maintained and run by the library board, which is an autonomous group, autonomous from this council, has its own budget that pays for their staffing, pays for their programming, and does pay for their maintenance. And while it's the fact that it's a standalone building and the history of the township's Public Works Department working with the library board, I wasn't here, I don't know. What I do know is the fact that we're all in one building now, and it is clearly the township's building. We've talked about shared services, whether it's IT, human resources, and certainly the cleaning and the maintenance of the building. It's all going to be more efficient now that we're in a single building. But to put everything on one person, one department for the last 20 years, I would submit that the design of the building was awful. The maintenance or lack thereof did not create the spell in that building, did not create all the features that make that building unusable
Well,
today.
part of the report that we received today was saying that the gutters weren't clean for years, and that caused the roof to freeze, and it caused the shingles to break.
But that's not the only problem that building
He's not in charge of that building.
That's not the only problem that building has.
Well, let's deal with one or two. Is there any correspondence from the director saying that he can't meet his responsibilities on that building? So, even though it may belong to the library, I think it's a township building. It's clearly a town, isn't it? The library doesn't own it, the town does. Because we just voted tonight to knock it down without the library being here. So, if he, is there any written thing from him, any memo saying that he...
I don't think there is, and I don't blame him for it. So
You don't blame him for it?
No, I don't.
So then how do we know that whoever you're not going to blame again is going to maintain this building? If the person before who's responsible for...
Once again, 10, 12 years ago, there was a building maintenance division within Public Works. That division doesn't exist anymore. Those positions have been eliminated. There is no buildings and grounds division. There is no building maintenance division of the township. The township has taken that department and shrunk it by half. And it's been multiple councils over multiple years, multiple administrations. This council, I'm happy to say, has taken steps this year to actually make the department more efficient, not less efficient. But to just discard the fact that a department has twice as much responsibility and half the staff to do it, and yet, you know what, let's pick on the one guy who...
No, I don't think we should pick on him, but I'm just curious if he has sent anything. You know, like I equate it to being like the captain of a ship. If the captain is sailing from here to Europe, and he's not going anywhere near Europe, he's meandering off the coast of South America and doesn't give anybody a report about that.
Yeah, I don't know what he did prior to my time here, Mr. Zenick, and I've been here almost 3 years.
And I'm not saying, please don't say I'm trying to blame him, but I'm just, is there anything, are there any reports?
I'm not aware of anything prior to my time here, but since I've been here,
That would seem kind of derelict on everybody's part.
I don't know that there's an actual memo, but if you've been to any of our budget meetings, we're discussing, and he comes in front of us, as well as utility and all of the different departments with their budgets. He lets us know that, you know, if this is what you want, it's not going to get done as well because it needs to be cut. And we actually ended up this year bolstering his
So at some point he notified you saying that, hey, I can't maintain this building at all.
Not
Mr.
exactly a
Zane,
building.
Victoria and I actually went through a tour of the town, and he was one of the department heads that we looked at, and I believe he explained some things that he was limited in, and other things that I don't know what you think, Victoria, but we got a pretty much overview, I think.
We got a 40-year-old building that we're going to knock down, and that seems like there has to be some sort of accountability for that. That's a $7 million mistake that we're going to knock down. And now we're going to put up an amphitheater.
I don't think anybody said that.
Well, some sort of theater thing that's going to...
Not a state, it's not a library. Code would change, building code would change.
Yeah, but once again, about those codes, unless you do more than 51% of the building does not have to be brought up to code. 51%.
Change the use. We're changing the use.
If you change use,
We're
it
not
has to be
going
brought
to
up.
we're not going to have another library there.
Yeah, but it may not be a library, but it may fall within the same use group that the city.
Mr. Zenick, if we learn the lessons of the past, right, which we should do, we should go and look through how to do our assets and our values in the future. And I think this council wants to do that.
Absolutely.
Will there be somebody in charge of the buildings, municipal buildings, to issue reports, like a yearly report?
That sounds like a portion of a design that would be valuable, yes.
That each year we should say, hey, well, by the way,
I can only
this
speak
is
for myself,
new,
but yeah, that would
new.
be.
But right now, it's been 40 years that we're being somewhat crammed down our throat that we're going to knock down the building.
But a report, that sounds like a design value. Those are the things we need to look into.
And in the past, for the last 40 years, we didn't get a report that something was wrong, that, hey, if we don't take care of this building, we're going to have to knock it down.
We can't take anything in the past and redo it. We can only tell you we're moving forward, and this council is moving forward.
So there'll be somebody in charge of grounds and buildings to issue reports on the whole.
Scott will work on dealing with Mr. Mr. Ewers, and dealing with his maintenance plan of how it's going to go forward. And we'll go from there.
Well, I don't know. I see that the kids in the town are in schools and they have to sit inside mold-infested classrooms while there's actually mold eating the pages of the school books. The people who remove the mold wear full gear, protective gear, to take it out. Yet the kids are still in the classroom, the teachers are in the classroom.
That's not in this town.
So, yes, sir.
It's in this town?
Yes, sir.
All points well made.
We don't control the schools, but we certainly can look in the future to deal with the asset that is all
Yeah,
up.
just, we would like as citizens to have some sort of reassurance that the 40 years where no report was issued on the buildings, that now with this edifice, that something would be, at least the warning light was
Thank you, Mr.
on.
Dick. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Judge.
I usually don't get up a second time. Monique Beck, 209 Parry Drive. But I think I have something to say, which I think comes to the fact that so many people are pressuring council that they don't want to pay one more dollar or one more penny in taxes annually, so that you're forced to keep the budget to make shortcuts in certain areas where it should not be. So I think we should really restore the maintenance of the building, put that in and make it a priority, because it costs a lot more over the years than the amount of taxes that it would cost us annually per home. So I really think that we have to face reality and be willing to pay a little more for keeping our buildings, so we don't have to rebuild another building or come to buildings that have been semi-destroyed over the years. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, can I just add something?
Sure, please.
Probably one of the longest people here. It's kind of a combination of everything that people have talked about. I'm not going to talk about maintenance schedules and stuff like that, but I can tell you over the years, a lot of things have been overanalyzed and things don't always get done by past councils. At the parking lot, for instance, across the street, Mr. Ewers is technically responsible for that. Well, he can't really do anything because everybody keeps analyzing it 20 times over, and instead of going in there, if he just had the parking lot and had to repave it, he would repave it. Everybody for 15, 20 years I've been here right now comes up with a different plan, and so that doesn't get done because he's got to wait till he gets a plan. Because you're not going to sit there and resurface it if somebody tells you next year or 2 years from now that you're going to be redoing a whole, parking lot, and then a new council comes in and then they change it and things just get put off. Same thing happened with the library. The library in 2004 was going to be redone. There's been problems with the roof. Mr. Ewers is not going to put a brand new roof on a building to last 40 years if an issue is going to be resolved, and then, the problem gets talked about through councils over years, gets pushed back, and, here we are. We were out at the 2 Executive Drive for 7 years. That's not his fault, because, again, he's not going to put a new roof on, and he keeps being told, something's going to happen, and it gets pushed off. That's all I'm going to say on it. It's just, there's a lot of things. It's a lot more complicated, and then as Ms. Begg pointed out, tax dollar is an important part of it. So they try to maintain what they can, but you're not going to sit there and put a new 40-year roof on something that everybody knows that they're going to be doing a combined building here. So does that make sense?
Thank you, Tom. Point well made. Okay, at this point, we'll go to closing comments by council. We'll start with Greg.
Well, I just wanted to actually agree with Mr. Rochelle and go back to the fact that predictive, proactive, and preventative things are what we need to look at as we analyze these things. And I'm glad that we're all thinking in that direction. I won't bring up computerized maintenance management systems.
keeping track. Your over-under's
I
five.
was gonna say, all those things
I
related to
have
that.
five, I have five. If you can just mention it one more time, I just
And in addition, I forgot to report that we had an excellent seminar on what we should do with Strawbridge Lake, which Phil and I attended. That was done by Princeton Hydro, and I was actually able to video it. If I could figure out, maybe Victoria can help me, but if I could figure out how to take the video and move it to the proper sources, we could probably all view it. I'm working forward to that. And thank you all for coming tonight. It's great to see all these people come out on a summer night.
Bill?
Thank you all for coming out. Have a good night. That's all I have.
Victoria?
Thanks for coming, good night.
Just wanted to I just wanted to, again, thank Kathy Ward and the people from Sustainable Morristown for their volunteer work. They've done a great job, as well as Kathy Logue and everyone from the Franklin Gershon Park. Really do appreciate it. Hopefully we'll be able to pressure it, get some pressure, find some answers for you to get that moving. And I just wanted to congratulate you for getting the TCA done for the library. That's awesome. I'm excited that it's going to be opening.
Nice.
Thank you.
Scott's inspired. You
No, I just won't, I'd be remiss if I didn't point this out really quick. Please come to the library starting tomorrow. As we pointed out and talking about the maintenance, there was a terrible smell in the old building. Some of that smell came over with the books. That smell's now gone. Thanks to Mr. Reagan's design of the HVAC system, but the person I really want to thank, council, is Pete Barr from the library board, who's made it part of his life's mission over the last 3 years to get the smell out of the books, and he's research, I think, played a lot into Rick's design of the HVAC system, so I just wanted to give my appreciation to Mr. Barr.
You know, I'm sorry, I wanted to add something. I know that one of us is involved in a theater production that's coming up pretty soon, and I might say that that'd be great, by the Moore Arts Organization. And there's another theater production we all should think about going to, because we mentioned theater a lot, and that's The Sound of Music. So one is The Sound of Music, Moore Arts is doing, and I think the other one is in Anatevka. It's The Fiddler on the Roof. So we should think about going to those. Thank you for indulging me.
Okay, folks, we do not have closed session tonight, so good night and thanks very much.